Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tony Arenas. I am the product specialist for this video, and today in this video we're going to go over two sets of options in Photoshop, and that is smart objects and groups. So there is a distinct difference between the two. With groups, you're able to actually group things together, make things work in tandem with each other. So if I was going to move this particular picture here, if I move the actual layer here, I actually move everything, but I'm losing my adjustment layer that I have with it. There's one way I can always select both of them and I can actually move them around. But if I'm dealing with multiple, like 3 or 4 or 5 different layers and everything else, I don't want to actually always select them. And what I could do here is I can select both of these together and use it as a group. And then from here on out, when I actually select one, I select them both. Now, if I wanted to select the individual parts, I just go into here, select that individual part, and then I can move it again. So this allows me to do some really cool stuff with my art, and I'm actually creating stuff and so forth. Now, with smart objects, it's kind of like grouping things together. What I could do is I could take individual parts together and group them together to make them one whole section. But what I do is I lose the ability to select individual parts. But there's some advantages and disadvantages to that, where with smart objects, there's a lot of cool things you could do. Again, there's some disadvantages to the whole thing in that aspect. So in this case, if I decide to go ahead and turn this into convert to a smart object, again, this is one whole piece now. I'm not able to select the individual layer there unless I actually double click onto the smart layer itself, and then from here I can readjust accordingly. So you can do that, or if you prefer doing your adjustments on the fly, definitely want to stick to groups and so forth. Now, the cool thing about using smart objects is it does protect the actual pixels you're actually using for your actual layer. So let's give you an example. I have a smart object here. I'm going to go ahead and select that. I'm going to hit Control C to copy, and I'm going to hit Control V to paste it in place. So from here I can say, all right, I can readjust this a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and shrink this down. I hit enter, and then from here, because it's still a smart object, I can actually make this big again and not worry about it distorting. Another way, a good way to deal with smart objects is importing pictures from other media like Adobe Illustrator. So I can bring it in multiple different ways. I can bring it in with a file place, but if you want to do the old traditional copy and paste, that's perfectly fine. But what it's going to do is it's going to prompt you to pick a particular way to do the paste. So I can do it as a smart object, and you can do it as a pixel. So I'm going to do both. I'm going to do one as a smart object. I'm going to let that sit, and then I'm going to hit again. Oops. And I'm going to hit again, and then I'm going to use it as a pixel, just to give you an example of how each one works. So I have both here, smart object and otherwise. So we're going to do the pixel one first, and I'm going to hit Control T to make this a little bit bigger. And as you can tell, you can see a lot of pixelation here, a little bit of weirdness going on around the edges here. But I've used the smart object So once I set that actual transition, you can actually see it a little bit clearer and a little bit nicer. So this one is the actual layer 2 here, is that is the pixelated one, and the other one is not. And you can see that there is a big stark difference between the two. The colors are a lot more brighter in the smart object. They're a lot more cleaner, especially since I brought it in from Illustrator and so forth. Let's go ahead and take her out, and you can see it's a lot better and smoother from one section to another. The other cool things about smart objects is you're actually able to utilize your filters to a really full degree. So with filters, I do recommend you can use these filters, but use them a little bit sparingly. Be very careful about how you render these actual filters. So what I'm actually can do is I can actually do let's do a Gaussian blur right now, add in a little bit of quite a bit of a filter into here, And what this does is it allows me to have this here. So what it's going to do, let's make that a little bit bigger. There we go. So you have the Gaussian blur here, and then it adds this actual smart filter into this. This is another alpha layer for your actual blur effects. So I can easily say, all right, I want to do my gradient tool here. Select my area that I want to utilize. Let's reverse that. So I added a gradient to the actual blur here, and what it does is it allows me to create a almost like a weird tone of shift between what becomes blur and what doesn't become blur. And I can use that with a lot of different things. And then even double click it into the Gaussian blur and even readjust it from there. So if I feel like it's too much of a blur, I can readjust it so that it's always there. With normal layers, so if I did that with my actual layer here, once I actually set the filter, I can't get it out. So if I say, let's go to my Gaussian blur, I'll set it. That's it. I can't really adjust that from there. With smart objects, I can always constantly go back and readjust it from there as well. There's some neat tricks that I like to do. So like if I wanted to say I wanted to add a lens flare or something like that, what I can do is I can create a new layer, a hill, and then from here I can say, all right, we're going to make this into overlay. I'm going to fit this with a 50% bill with 50% gray. Turn this into a smart object. And then say filter, and I can do a render and add in a lens flare, and then I can readjust this lens flare where I want it and so forth. So I can make it like super duper bright and hit OK. And then if I wanted to change that, I can change it so that it is a lot more vivid. So you can see where all that lens flare is going to be. So I could say it's an overlay, or I can make it a hard light. And I can see where my lens flare doesn't really fit, so I can bring it up a little bit and then readjust it accordingly and so forth. So you have those options to work with some really cool techniques, some really cool effects when it comes to applying certain things into with Photoshop. So it's about playing around, trying to use that smart object to your advantage. Again, the disadvantage is I can't draw on this anymore. I can't do any, I can't take a regular brush here and use it. It gives cross me out. I could still use a masking layer onto here. So like if I said this one up here, I have this lady here. I already have her masked. I want to now try to make her in a different style of mask, make her blend from one position to another. So if I say, let's add another mask here, I can do a gradient from her fingertip to the edge of her shoulder. And I have her fade in and out accordingly to where I want it. So I can even do it in reverse. So I have that ability there to do some really cool stuff with my smart objects that you want to try out and so forth. So once again, my name is Tony Arenas, and this has been a Photoshop video on both groups and smart objects.